Welcome everybody to another Thursday night Shiur. This week we are at mitzvah number 38 in the Rambam Sefer Hamitzvot. The topic will be the power of thoughts, and we'll talk about it a little bit. Again, we'll always, as we always do, we'll see first the Rambam inside. We'll see some of the. There's practically for us, there's not a lot of halachos relevant to the mitzvah. We'll see what the mitzvah is, and then we'll get down to the more practical part of the mitzvah, how we can apply it to ourselves. I'll share the screen with you, and let's take a look. Okay, that's the Zoom screen. Here we go. So, as you can see, we are mitzvah number 38. Hishetziva Kohen Gadol Sheyisa Besula. The commandment is that a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, must marry a woman who has never been married before. And this is what the Torah says: V'hu, and he Isha b'vsuleha yikach, he will marry a woman who has never been married. Ubebir, in the explanation, Amru, the Gemara explains, Osa haya Rabbi Akiva mamzer afilu mechayve asay. So somebody is considered a mamzer, a child whose results, the child of a union, even if that union was from the prohibition that is only a positive commandment. Meaning it says that there's a positive commandment of someone who the Kohen must marry. The Kohen must marry a woman who had never been married. It doesn't say he's not allowed to marry a woman who's already married. So it's really in a positive form. And still that Rabbi Akiva says that would produce, if they would have a child, such a union, a child that would come from that would be a mamzer, which is quite an unfortunate status. It's talking about specifically a Kohen Gadol who marries a woman who is prohibited to him in a positive commandment, that child will be a mamzer. The rule we have with regards to the Torah is lav haba mechlal aseh, when there's an implicit negative commandment and it's implied from a positive commandment. So then the status of that commandment is an aseh. It stands as a positive commandment. So since here it says he must marry this type of person, so that implies that there's a negative commandment for him to marry other people. And however, since it was expressed in the positive, therefore it only carries the weight of a positive commandment. This mitzvah is already explained in the Gemara in many places. Now it's important to note this is very practical halacha. This is practical for today. Today in 2022, if we were to have a Kohen Gadol, so then that would be the case. He would not marry a woman that was pre-married. She could only marry a woman who had never been married before. The part that's not relevant is that we don't have a Kohen Gadol today. We don't have a high priest. Kohen Gadol was only in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, to a degree, it's not relevant. In that respect, it's not relevant because the concept of having a Kohen Gadol does not exist. So now, as always, let's take a look in the Chumash, in the Torah, and see where the pasuk that the Rambam quotes. And the Rambam says this pasuk right here. It's in Vayikra, and it says, "V'hu, and he Isha b'vsuleha yikach." He will take a woman into his household who's never been married. And then, interestingly enough, the next line of the Torah says, "Almana ugrusha," a widow or a divorced woman, v'chalala, or someone who is v'chalala zona, or someone who is immoral. As eila lo yikach, he may not marry those. Ki im besula me'amav yikach isha. You can only take somebody from the Jewish nation who has never been married. Now, it's important to note that from the second pasuk, we see that there's a negative commandment as well. Lo yikach is an outright negative commandment. It's not just implicit, it's an outright negative commandment. So therefore, it would seem that these things carry this commandment for a Kohen Gadol, for the high priest to marry anybody besides a Besula, a woman that had never been married. It carries with it a positive and a negative commandment together. And that's pretty much it for the practical halachos. The Gemara gets into details of what age a woman does it count for a woman to be that the Kohen Gadol can marry her? What if he was married to a woman before he was appointed as the high priest, and now that he's appointed to the high priest, he's, so to speak, inadvertently married to a woman who was already married before? Does that change? Does it matter? All those details are discussed in the Gemara in Yevamos and in other places, but that's not the topic of the class tonight. So, as always, we want to understand what's the root and what's the underlying idea behind the mitzvos. And therefore, we're going to turn our attention to the chinuch. And the chinuch, when he talks about this mitzvah, he says, the English is down below, all the way in the bottom, so you'll have to bear with me. We're not going to go through it all. But he says, Misharashe ha-mitzvah, from the root of this mitzvah, L'fi sheha'ikr hatov sheba adam, hu she'iyeh l'machshavas tahara v'nikius. The greatest thing for a person to have is to have clean and pure thoughts. Ki acharei ha-machshavos, because through our thoughts, yimshach ma'isa hagufos, that will define our actions. We are what we think. The things that we think about, that's how we portray ourselves, that's how we will act. And therefore, al kain, therefore, says the chinuch, ra'oi lo l'misharis hagadol, it's befitting for this high priest, the servant, the Kohen Gadol, who's serving in the Beis HaMikdash, lehidabek b'isha shelo kava machshava b'shacher, that he should be connected to a woman who never thought about another man, zulasi bo, besides him, shu kodesh hakadashim, who's a holy man. Mitoch kach, and because he will have a wife who never set her eyes on another man, is very focused in her relationship to this Kohen. The children that will come from such a marriage, they will be ready to serve in holiness. And because of that, therefore, the Torah says, "Oh, Kohen Gadol, somebody of such a high stature, he should marry a woman that has never been married before." In that way, when it comes to somebody that's so connected to Hashem in such a practical way, terms of the Kohen Gadol has more practical connection to God than the rest of us, because he goes into the Beis HaMikdash in the Holy Temple every single day and night. He does service there all the time. That's always part of his job. And therefore, he's always connected deeply and physically to Hashem. And therefore, in order to make sure that we perpetuate that holy line of Kohanim, of priests, and we make sure that he is married to a woman that is a very dedicated wife, and a person who is just as pure and as holy as he is, we want to make sure that she has never been married to anybody else. That way her thoughts are also pure, and she is only thinking about this man. Now, what we see from here is that the idea behind this mitzvah is the thoughts that go into a person's actions. This line that the chinuch says, Ki acharei hamachshavos, after the thoughts, yimshach ma'isa hagufos, is what the actions of our body addresses. So we say in davening on Friday nights, in Kabbalah Shabbos, we say that sof ma'aseh, the end result, the end action that I have done, is machshavat chila, is a thought that I had first. Everything starts with the machshav. Everything starts with the thought. Now I want to show you. We're going to go through a little bit of a grammar lesson. It's a grammar lesson in Hebrew, and we'll see certain relationship between certain words. That's going to give us a practical thing for us to do in our own life, how we can work on our thoughts. Now, the story in the Torah is something that I'm sure you're familiar with, and the story is that this is at the end of Yaakov's life. Yaakov has had quite a busy interaction in his life, and right now he is in the situation where he's in Egypt. He's been finally reunited with Yosef, his son, and Yosef is second to the king, and therefore he's in a very, very high position. And now Yaakov is getting ill, and Yosef wants his children to get a blessing from their grandfather, and therefore he's going to have a little interaction. I'm sorry you have to excuse me. Somebody's knocking at the door of the shul, so give me 1 second. I apologize. Apologize. We have two very special guests for the Shiur. The chests are here, and we're always happy to have people in person. So just a quick recap, the mitzvah that we're talking about is mitzvah number 38, that the Rambam tells us that a Kohen has to marry a woman that has never been married before, a Kohen Gadol, I should say, and a Kohen Gadol has to marry him. And we try to understand what the reason behind this mitzvah is, and the Chinuch says, because the Kohen Gadol's stature, and he's going to be serving in the Beis HaMikdash all the time, We want that the woman that he marries should have a very central focus and not be distracted by anything else. And one of the things that we want is that she has never been married. She never set her eyes on another man. She's always very focused in this relationship with her husband. And now we're going to talk about a little bit about the machshava, the thought of a person. The chinuch used a line. He says, "Ki acharei hamachshavos," based on a person's thoughts, yimshach ma'isa hagufos. That will translate into our actions. And therefore, we're going to give a little bit of a grammar lesson. This is where we left off. A little bit of a grammar lesson in Hebrew, and therefore we can understand a little bit the concept of machshava, of thought, and how they can relate to us. So the story is with Yosef and Yaakov. Yosef has brought his two sons to get a blessing from their grandfather Yaakov. And it says, Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef. Yisrael is another term for Yaakov. He says to Yosef, Re'ei panecha lo filalti. Says, I never expected to see your face again. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. V'hine hera osi elokim gam ezarecha. And look, Hashem has allowed me not just to see you, but he's even allowed me to see your children. And this is a momentous occasion. I'm so happy that I got to see my children, my grandchildren from you. Now, Rashi tells us, that's a pasuk at the end in Vayechi. And that Rashi tells us, Re'ei panecha, look at lo filalti, when Yaakov said to Yosef, I never expected to see your face again. Rashi says, lo filalti, what does the word pilalti mean? So says Rashi, lo mila ani libi, my heart was never involved or contemplated lachshov machshava, to have a thought, she'er panecha od. I never imagined or never dared to even think in my heart that I'd ever see you again. I didn't think it was possible. I thought you were gone for good. So pilalti, yeah, we'll get there. Pilalti is lashon machshava, says Rashi. And this is where one of the things we're going to get to is the word pilalti is a thought, is thinking. Kimo haviyi etza asi palilo, which is a quote from a pasuk in Yeshaya, give counsel and carry out the thought. The word palila and pilalti comes from machshava. Is the word means, says Rashi, Rashi's translating for us. It means thought. That's what it means. Now, that's Rashi's approach. There's a chizkuni, and the chizkuni says that's not what pilalti means. Pilalti doesn't just mean think. He says lo pilalti is lashon tefillah, is prayer. Kimo, as it says in the Torah regarding Pinchas, vayamot Pinchas vayafalo. He got up and he prayed. And what does it mean? So what was Yaakov saying to Yosef? Lo hispalalti liros panecha. I never davened to see you again. I never davened to Hashem that I should see you. Why? Shahari al-Marti, because they told me, Tarov, Torah, Yosef, you've been torn apart. And I never thought you don't daven for something that's not going to happen. I know the direction was that I would come to you. You're already gone from this world. So I never even prayed to see you. Don't worry, the Chizkuni doesn't dismiss Rashi. He says, Davar acher lo danti belibi kol kilul lashon din. I never judged or thought in my heart, which seems to be a similar idea to the way Rashi understood of more about thought. But perhaps we can suggest that the two words of pilalti, meaning tefillah, prayer, and machshava, are related. Okay, now where do we see that they're related? Let's take a look at the Torah. The Torah says as follows. The Torah says, this is the Torah at the beginning of Hilchos Tefillin. Okay, now I know that the women in the crowd don't wear tefillin. It's fine. But the concept of what the Torah mentions is going to be something that's relevant to everybody. And he says like this, Hilchos Tefillin. After the men have put on their tzitzis, yaniach tefillin, miyad, immediately we should put on our tefillin. He perhaps is talking about the talis, not the small tzitzis that we wear under our shirts. And the reason why we do it right away is kadeshi mitzuyin lo b'shas kriya shema v'tefillah. We want you to be wearing your tefillin at the time that you're going to say Shema and the Shemona Esrei. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan says, Hagrotza lekavel olav o malchus shamayim shlema, a person who wants to properly and fully and completely, wholeheartedly accept the yoke of heaven upon them. Yifne v'yital yadav, he should relieve himself, wash his hands, put on tefillin, say Shema and daven, and say Shemona Esrei. The Omer Ula, and Ula says, Kol hakore kriya Shema below tefillin. Anybody who says Shema without tefillin, this is obviously on a weekday, doesn't include Shabbos, and so on, ki'ilu meid edus sheker ba'atzma, as if he testified falsely. Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan ki'ilu hikr v'ola below mincha zevach v'unsachim. All that's as if all the things that not such a good idea. Therefore, we should always make sure that we're wearing our talis and our tefillin in order to daven. Now says the Torah's father was the Rosh. The Rosh was a student of the Maharami Rutenberg. Maharami Rutenberg is the father of halacha, if we could say that. And many of the things that we do today are rooted all the way back in the Maharami Rutenberg's teachings. The Rosh was one of his primary students. In fact, when the Maharami Rutenberg was incarcerated and he died while in captivity, he sent a letter to the Rosh. He said, you have to leave, get out of Germany, get out of here, run for your life. This is not a safe place. They're going to come after you next. And therefore the Rosh left. Now, V'ra'isi la'adoni avi zal. I saw from my father. This is the Torah talking about his father, the Rosh. I saw my father. Shahaya medaktek lahanichon. He was specific about when he put on his tefillin. Kishahaya mesader habrachos, v'haya mesadem zeh. So in your siddur, you open up the birkos hashachar, the morning blessings. You have about 10 blessings that are said one after the other. It starts off lanosei masech vivina. That God has given either the heart or the rooster to distinguish knowledge, to distinguish between day and night, and all of the blessings that are said. One of the things that we say is Oter Yisrael b'tif ara, that Hashem crowns the Jewish nation with glory. And the Rosh would wait until he got to that blessing. And right before he said that blessing, then he would put on the tefillin, Oter Yisrael b'tif ara, and then he would say that God crowns the Jewish people with glory. And why would he do it there? Because another term for tefillin that is used in Navi is pe'er. As it says, Hashem told Yeshaya, pe'ercha chavosh alecha, that he was actually in mourning. And generally the halacha is that a person who's in mourning does not wear tefillin, on the first day at least. But there was a special dispensation for Yeshaya. No, you, pe'ercha chavosh alecha, you're going to wear your tefillin. And therefore, that's why the Rosh would wait for that. Now, here's the point we've been waiting for. The tefillin lashon pelila. The word tefillin also comes from the language of pelila, the same root that we've had for thought, that we've had for tefillah, for prayer. All these three things are somehow connected. And what does the Torah say? Shehein os, it's a sign, the edus, and a testimony, l'chol ro'enu, to all those that see us, shehashchina shora aleinu, that the Shechina, Hashem's presence, rests upon us. As it says, all the nations of the world will see, Kishem Hashem Nikra Alecha, that the name of Hashem is called upon you. There's a very famous story with the Vilna Gaon. Vilna Gaon was once wearing his tefillin. He was in a little inn somewhere, and there was a robber, a thief, who came, and he was going from room to room, stealing people's money. When he came into the room, he burst open the door of the Vilna Gaon. He saw the Vilna Gaon. He dropped all the things that he had, and he ran for his life. And the student that was with the Vilna Gaon asked him, says, why did he run? He says, because the Torah says, the pasuk says, that Vira'u kol amei haaretz, all the nations of the world will see Kishem Hashem Nikra Alecha, which is a reference to the tefillin of the head, and they're going to see that. And the last words of the pasuk are Vira'u mimeka, and they'll be fearful of you, they're going to be scared. So they saw the tefillin. So the next time, the student said, okay, great idea. So he heard a robber coming at a different time, months later, whatever it was, he was in on his own, and he quickly put on his tefillin. And the guy bursts in the door and just steals the money. Nothing happened. So he goes back to the Vilna Gaon. He said, it didn't work. I don't understand what's going on. So the Vilna Gaon told him, when the Gemara explains that it's talking about the tefillin and on our head, it doesn't say Elu tefillin al harosh. It's not the tefillin that are on our head. It's Elu tefillin shebarosh. That's the word of the Gemara. It's the tefillin that's in our head, meaning the tefillin is just a physical thing, but it has to be connected with what we're thinking. This ties back to our machshava. So we have tefillin, which comes from the idea of showing the world. It's a sign and a testimony that Hashem is resting upon us. One of the ways that we show that Hashem is resting upon us, some of you asked me about my vacation before we started the Shiur. So now, when you go on vacation, especially we go remote places in the middle of nowhere, and you walk into a supermarket, and everybody takes a look because, I don't know, in the middle of Landrum, South Carolina, I don't know how many Jews they come through, that travel through, probably not too many. So they say, okay, that guy's wearing something on his head, he's got a beard. There happens to be a lot of beards in South Carolina, I have to be honest, a lot of beards, very, very popular. So I didn't feel so out of place. But the yarmulke is something that they don't see, and the tzitzis, and it looks different, and they stop and they take a look. And I had a friend who was once traveling. He was actually traveling through Germany. A very interesting story. And he said that it was time for him to daven, and he had to put on his talis and tefillin. Now, you go to the airport in Israel, there's a shul, and you can daven there. It's fantastic. Or you go to the airport in New York, there's minyanim for, when if you're traveling to Israel, there's just people all over the place. Or if it's traveling at a good time during the winter vacation, you'll probably find a minyan even in Boston Logan Airport. However, through Germany, not always. So now he's traveling through Germany, and he asks somebody who works in the airport, is there a place for people to pray? So the person, and he suspects this was not just a language barrier issue, the person said, we have a place for the Muslims. We have a place for the Christians. We do not have a place for the Jews. So he said, okay, no problem. So he found the most center place in the entire airport. He whipped out his tallis with a whole fanfare, put it on, and he really got all enthusiastic. He's like, there's a place for the Jews wherever we go. So that's the idea is that prayer is something that shows that Hashem is resting with us. Why? Because that's our moment to connect. Now, how do we connect to Hashem? It's we don't see him. It's not something that we can touch. It's not something that we can feel or see. So what is it? How do we connect to Hashem? And prayer is all about thought. It's all about machshava. It's all about what goes on in our mind. The Shulchan Aruch tells us that in the first blessing of Shmona Esrei, in the first bracha from Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosseinu, all the way until Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham, that place, one has to have intention not just of the translation of the words, but he should also be thinking that he's standing before Hashem. He's standing before the King of Kings. That's something that is required for prayer. It's one thing that is the way to fulfill the mitzvah appropriately. We have to have that in mind. When we say Shema Yisrael, we cover our eyes and we say, Hear, O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, our God, Hashem Echad, God is one. We have to think of the translation. We have to think of the words. We have to understand what we're saying. And that's the way we'll fulfill it. It's all of what goes on in our mind. So we had the Rashi telling us that Re'ei panecha lo filalti. What does filalti mean? It was machshav, a thought. Yaakov never thought he'd see. Then the Chizkuni said, it's not just thought, it's tefillah, it's prayer. Now, you only pray about things if you think about them. Yaakov never thought to daven for Yosef because he thought he was dead. So there's nothing to think about, therefore there was nothing to pray about. The Torah is telling us that by prayer, by having the thoughts that we're supposed to have during prayer, that's going to show that the Shekhinah rests upon us, that Hashem is with us. And therefore we can have machshava that creates a tremendous, deep and emotional connection with Hashem, as long as all we do is think about it. Rabbi Victor Miller very often would say, in many of his shiurim, he would very often say, a person can accomplish a tremendous amount with his imagination. We know that if a person has a certain amount of money, so then there's guidelines of how much charity, how much tzedakah, how much ma'aser they have to give. A person cannot just be wasteful. The Chacham told us, Rotze levazvez ali levazvez yoser michomish. If you want to spend all your money on charity, not more than a fifth of your estate. Can't give more than a fifth. Can't just throw money around. Now, if a person has smaller means, so then that's a smaller amount that they can give. Larger means, that's a larger amount that they can give. But said Rabbi Victor Miller, imagine he gives a mushal. I think I've said this mushal in the past. Imagine you have a crushed up can, a soda can. And then you know that there's this wall, and beyond the wall is supposed to be beautiful pastures and hills and things that but you can't climb up to see. So what do? You take this can and you unravel it and you start to polish it and shine it and shine it and shine it and shine and shine and shine. And eventually you have this gleaming mirror. And then all you got to do is just hold it up and look, and now you can see everything beyond the wall, all because of that mirror. So says Rabbi Victor Miller, that's the power of our imagination. That's the power of machshava, of thought. I can imagine myself, if I were a billionaire, so then I give $1 billion to tzedakah. And that counts. That's like something that we've done. That's this mitzvah that we've completed with our mind. Unfortunately, my business keeps me too busy. If I had more time, I would dedicate it to studying the Torah. That's great. So then that's something that our machshava, it's the first step in creating, like the chinuch told us, the first step in creating that the machshava, the thought, will result in our physical actions. So if we could take a lesson from this mitzvah, the mitzvah number 38, again, just to quickly recap, the mitzvah is that a Kohen Gadol must marry a woman who had never been married. The reason that the chinuch told us about is because we want her to have a singular focus. We don't want her to have other men in mind. We don't want her to have thought about other men, focused on her husband, on the spiritual, very holy relationship that she has with this person. And therefore, we want to understand what it means to have machshava, what the thoughts of a person are. We saw Rashi and the Chizkuni that told us that the word pelila comes from either thought or prayer. And therefore, we we also saw the Torah who told us about tefillin, which is also the language of Halilu, which shows that Hashem is resting upon us. And with all of these three things together, we can understand that with our imagination, with our thoughts, with our prayer, we can connect to Hashem in a truly deep and meaningful way, and it will eventually result in our actions living together with Hashem. Thank you so much for coming. If anybody has any questions, feel free to answer. I'll try my best to answer at least.
The regular person cannot marry a Rusha, but
he can marry an almana, right? That's right, a widow, right? Not a, right. That's right.
It's a very strange word.
It's a unique.
What is it?
It's almost the language of hitpael is always almost like it's evoked by some external means. I think the idea I always understood it is because tefillah really starts with our feelings. Right? It used to be before the Anshe Knesset Hagedola gave us a siddur. So how did a person pray? It came from their heart. And whatever they wanted to say, however they deeply connected with something or that they were worried about, they were happy about, came from their heart, and they were able to express it. And then it just happened. Just not the word hitpalel, not like that. It's all that when the Medrash quotes and says there's different terms for prayer, and it gets to the word tefillah, it quotes the pasuk that we saw, Pinchas, Vayamod Pinchas Vayafalo, and he got up and he prayed. That's Vayafalo. So not specific, not when it's that clear that it's talking about prayer. The word palila comes in as advice or counsel, but not specific to prayer. That's right. Lasuach lasa. That's another ein sicha el tefillah. That's right. Sicha also means prayer. Right. That's right. There's I think the Maimonides has 10 different terms, and they each have a different nuance of what they mean. Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Are there other prayers where one is commanded besides, for example, the beginning of the Shemona Esrei or the Shema to focus?
So just to be clear, in order to we have a rule of mitzvos tzrichos kavana, that any performance of a mitzvah requires intention to perform that mitzvah, meaning I know that when I'm doing this action, it's for the sake and the purpose of fulfilling a mitzvah. So if I pick up a lulav and esrog and I think that I'm just playing around with toys, so then I have not fulfilled my commandment. If I know that I'm doing it for the sake of the mitzvah, so then that's sufficient. Now, when it comes to prayer is not really any different than that. The only question is, what kind of intention does one need during prayer? So when it comes to all the general aspects of prayer, the minimum that we need to have is translation of the words. Thank God for Art Scroll, right? And that way, we can read it along. You can read it together. That's the baseline. The best practice, the best way to do it would be if we also have in mind not just the actual translation of the words, but also what we're feeling or what we're thinking, things like that. When it comes to Shema, the first verse of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and the first blessing of Shemona Esrei, there's an extra intention. The first blessing of Shemona Esrei requires that we understand we're standing in front of the King of the Kings. We're standing in the presence of God. And the first verse in Shema requires that we understand the differences between Hashem and Elokeinu. Hashem was, and always will be, and Elokeinu is master of the universe. So that's the extra intention. That's the best way to perform the mitzvah. So really, we have to think of everything. But if at the very minimum, it should be the first verse in Shema and the first blessing in Shemona Esrei. Oter Yisrael b'Tifara, right? Well, no. Shema is afterwards, right? There is a Shema in Korbanos. Right. So that's part of Korbanos. There you'll just say the first Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That you don't fulfill your mitzvah of saying Kriya Shema, unless it's going to miss the time. So you say there. Why do we say Shema in Korbanos? So once we've said, really, it's all of the things that we say. Once we've said Birchas HaTorah, so even though we're transitioning into prayer, but we don't want the Birchas HaTorah to be for nothing. So we try to say Mishnayos. That's why Ezum Koman. We say Sukkim. So Shema is the first one, and we say Braisas, Bar Kapara. So there's different things that we say to accommodate. We've had Chumash, Sukkim, and Gemara, Mishnayos, all those things. That's why we included.
Rabbi?
A secret of avoiding distraction. There is no secret. I'll tell you, many years ago, I went. I did a little experiment with myself, and I tried to count how many times my mind wandered. Okay. Now, I was told after I performed this little experiment for myself that psychologically speaking, there's a phenomena that as soon as you start counting something, whatever it was before you counted, that will either skyrocket or will drop drastically. So I don't know, I don't know which way I went, but it wasn't pretty. It's practice, it's the same way that I'm not suggesting that tomorrow when you open your siddur for Shachris, you should have full 100% kavanah every second of it's impossible to just wake up like that. So tomorrow, you open up your siddur for the first bracha of Shmona Esrei, just that one. Okay? I won't be upset if you have more kavanah other places, but at least that one, very minimum, that one, you're going to think, I'm standing in front of God. This is what this word means, and that this means. It's 35 words. It'll take, and you'll do that for a month. And after a month, you'll see you'll get there. And once after a month, you'll pick the next bracha. Do that for another month, and eventually we can tack it together. It's practice. It's not. There's no short. Yeah, sure. So we have things we want to daven for, and we can get lost in those thoughts. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Children for tefillah is very challenging because at young age, the goal for our students and our kids is always we need to get them comfortable with the fluency and the skills of just reading. Now, that's a very dry exercise, and they're too young to understand. Oh, think about God. And I think you're standing in front of the presence of Hashem. We can say it here and there, but it's hard for them to relate to. So once they get to like the middle school age, and we try to encourage them, so they're like, "What do you mean? I just say this and it just flies, right?" And then it's okay. Slow it down. Let's try it again. It's a lifetime of work, really. It's the truth. It's you have to learn about it. We read the siddur, understand what it's telling us. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it's very powerful. Very powerful. Yeah. Sorry, Mark, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Could you talk a little more about the connection between machshava and understanding? What you're praying. What you're praying for.
What you're praying for. So, I mean, we all have needs, whatever those needs might be, whether they're financial, whether they're health related, whether they're relationship related. We all have needs.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Literally understanding the words.
Yeah, that's it. No special deep thoughts. We're not. There's the Siddur Harashash. He's a great makubal, very big Kabbalist. Let's read the words. Make sure we're reading the words properly. Make sure we understand the translation. That's our job. When we become Kabbalists, then we'll get into the Zohar. We're not ready for that. One day, God willing. But, we got to start at the basics.
So some people who don't know Hebrew might feel more comfortable in their native language.
Sure. Yeah. So there are rules about it and which things can be said and how they're translated. It's those are all things, but there are plenty properly translated Siddurim for people who speak other languages. But yeah, absolutely.
Like the Mitzuda.
Yeah.
Interlinear.
Yeah. 100%. Okay, wonderful. Thank you everybody for coming. Have a wonderful evening, a good Shabbos. God willing, we'll see you next week.
Shabbos in your heart. Thank you.
Shabbos.
Thank you very much. Everyone.